So thank you very much for joining us today. The purpose of today's webinar is to give you the opportunity to meet some of the learning coaches here at Barbary, and I will introduce you to them in a moment. But we've got not all of our learning coaches, but we have a selection of learning coaches available for your delectation today. So you'll be able to meet some of the learning coaches here at Barbary, and also to find out what's involved in prepping and the SQE 1 and 2, how we as learning coaches can actually help you, what's involved in sort of studying and all of that type of thing. So we will be taking questions. So if you have got any questions that you want to ask, please feel free to type them into the chat. Maybe a little bit later we might be able to take some actual sort of live questions on mic, but if you start off by typing them into the chat, because then hopefully we can sort of group them and deal with a particular area that might be that people might be concerned about, rather than just randomly dealing with subjects as we go along. So I think we'll start off by just doing an introduction to the learning coaches who are here today, just to give you a little bit of information about us and how we actually operate, and then we'll go on to deal with questions that you might have, or sort of standard queries that we often get from students who are thinking about starting a SQE prep course. So I'll start off. My name is Tracy Savage. I'm the Director of Learning for SQE here at Barbary. I'm also a learning coach, so I do support students as they're actually preparing for both SQE1 and SQE2 with us. I've been involved in legal education for an embarrassingly long time, actually. When I look at it, it's almost 30 years now. I'm a qualified solicitor. I qualified into a corporate firm working up in the northwest of England and the Midlands, and then went into legal education, as I say, almost 30 years ago, working at what was the College of Law, which was, there were very few legal education providers back in the day when I actually qualified. It's changed obviously a lot now. And I taught on the legal practice course. I've taught undergraduate LLB, I've taught the graduate diploma in law, and also a lot of post-qualification teaching as well. So I have a huge amount of experience of teaching at law from all levels. I've also taught law to a lot of non-lawyers as well, which is a slightly different kettle of fish, but there you go. So I'm just going to hand over now to Emily. Would you like to introduce yourself next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Allen, and I have been at Barbary, just been adding up. I've been working with Barbary for 4 years now, helping to get candidates ready first for the QLTS exam before SQE existed, which is a precursor, if you like, to SQE, very similar in structure. And before that, I worked with BPP, training people for the GDL law conversion course and also on the undergraduate law degree. So like Tracy, I have an embarrassing amount of experience in legal education. And in my case, I've just added up 14 years worth of experience of training people. Before that, I was in practice. I practiced as a barrister doing criminal law. Hence my area of expertise is crime. So if you get to the end of the SQE1 course, you'll see me in the lectures there.
Thanks, Emily. Jane, would you like to go next?
Hello everyone, I'm Jane Mckenzie. I have been at Barbary for over a year now. I'm a learning coach and supporting students on SQE1 and SQE2. Prior to that, I have an embarrassing amount of years of legal education behind me too. So I've been in legal education probably for about 25 years, teaching at the College of Law, which is now the University of Law, on the legal practice course and the graduate diploma in law. Prior to that, I qualified in a Newcastle upon Tyne firm and specialised in civil litigation.
Thanks, Jane. Jo, you're up next.
Hi everyone, I'm Jo White and I'm a learning coach with Barbary. I've worked at Barbary for just over a year. Before that, I worked as the academic manager at the University of Law in Manchester. And prior to that, I was in practice as an employment lawyer in Manchester for about 15 years. I've been in legal education for a less embarrassing amount of time, I think, about 10 years, but still lots of experience. So I look forward to welcoming you onto the course in the future, hopefully.
Thanks, Jo. Suzanne, would you like to go next?
Hello everybody, I'm Suzanne Reese. I am a solicitor, non-practicing. I spent 17 years in practice, focusing on dispute resolution, primarily personal injury defendant litigation. And then I moved into legal education, and I've been in legal education for about 15 years. I taught at City University on the Bar Professional Training course. I've worked at the University of Law on the undergraduate and postgraduate courses, GDL, and the solicitors course. And I've been working at Barbary since January of this year, so I'm quite new.
Thank you, everybody. So, as I've said, we're here to answer, all of your questions about what we do as learning coaches, what's involved in the course. If you had any questions about, what to expect from your studies, what's involved in the exam or whatever, we can answer those questions as well. So please feel free to add in any questions that you've got to the chat, and I will feed them across to our learning coaches. At the moment, we don't have any questions, so I'm just going to start off with some questions of my own, which are sort of standard style questions that a lot of prospective students ask us. So I would say, first of all, perhaps to Emily, could you just tell us a little bit about the SQE, particularly the SQE1, what's involved and what our course does? I'm not sure what everyone's background is and how much you actually know about SQE. So we're starting obviously at a relatively low level of understanding at the beginning. Apologies if we're telling you stuff that you already know, but if you've got more detailed questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll be able to answer those. So Emily, would you like to start off just with a little bit of what the SQE actually is?
Sure, yeah. So as you may or may not be aware, the SQE is a new route to qualification, and it involves 2 tests that you have to get through. SQE1, which is the course I think we're focusing on today, is a super exam, American style MCQ questions. So you have to do 2 days of MCQ examination, and you have to get to the overall pass mark across those 2 days. Now the pass mark will vary, but it's probably going to be between 55 and 60%. So vast amounts of legal knowledge that you need to get under your belt for SQE1. SQE2 follows on from that. It's a skills test, less detailed in terms of legal content, but still a lot of preparation. So the prep course that you're going to need to do in order to get ready for SQE1 will involve processing huge amounts of law, which Barbary in their course sets out in a very efficient and minimalist way, exactly just what you need for the purposes of the exam. They give you lots of practice questions to practice with as well, and they give you access to one of us, one of the learning coaches, to help you on that journey. So the learning coach's role in all of this is to help you as you navigate your way through a vast quantity of material, getting ready for a type of exam that you've probably never had to sit before, in terms of both the breadth of coverage that you need to get ready for one day, but also the format of question. And many of us have never had to do major MCQ exams before. So it's a different kind of preparation, and your learning coach is there to walk with you as you go on that journey, getting ready for the SQE1 exam.
Thanks very much, Emily. So we have got a question now, which is asking about if Barbary has a platform for students to form and any regular study groups. So Jane, could you just set out how our online course works, and also mention the strategy sessions, which I think is possibly something that Nikolai is interested in?
Yes, of course. We have workshops where we will deliver information to you and you can ask questions and meet other students. But we also have strategy sessions where which are held in the evening, where you can come along and chat to us and to other students. And also we operate a sort of WhatsApp group, and we don't operate it. Operations will set up WhatsApp groups that you can join and discuss perhaps study questions with a small group of students. So anything you want to add to that, Tracy?
Yeah, I would say it's actually not, we're not using WhatsApp anymore for those study groups. Instead, it's more that if students wish to swap sort of emails and give us their permission to do that, then we put them in touch with other students who actually want to study with them, because the WhatsApp group is a little bit, it got a little bit out of control, should we say, I think the first time around, because too many students in it means that it didn't really help in sort of a supportive study group. So we've changed that approach, yes. In relation to how our personal study plan actually works then, Jo, would you talk us a little bit through how the sort of electronic PSP, which is what we call our personal study plan, actually operates?
Yeah, so every student will have a personal study plan that you can either personalize, or you can just look at the entire course. And the personal study plan will take you through the whole course. So effectively, if you just follow that plan and you don't deviate from that plan, you will get all the material and all the information that you need, and that will prepare you for the final exam. And that includes the revision material. So it's not as though you get to the end of the course and then you drop off a cliff and you're left on your own to revise. All of the revision material is in your study plan as well. And you get an indication of how many hours you need to do each day. So if you are falling behind, then that will increase. And if you are ahead, that will decrease. So it gives you a clear indication as to where you are in the scheme of things. You have access to your learning coach if you have any queries throughout the course, if you're not sure. But the personal study plan is just that. It is your personal study plan. So it's not particularly helpful to compare your study plan to other people's. They may be at different parts of the course at different times. So it's really your focus on your personal study plan, set up the way you want it to be set up, and you follow that, and that will lead you nicely into the exam.
Thanks, Jo. Somebody has asked, can you have more information about how the personal study plan works? Fiona, I don't know if you can actually put the link into our, you can get it off our website if Fiona can't do it, but you can actually see a sort of trial of our PSP, which you can actually sign in for and get access to. And that shows you how our PSP actually operates. So it's not the full PSP, but it gives you some examples of our lectures, our multiple choice questions, our textbooks and so on. So that's a very useful thing to actually look at, to see how our electronic PSP is put together and what type of resources are available on that PSP for you. So as I say, hopefully Fiona can actually put it in the chat, but if not, you can actually get that from our website, and you can log into our review of our PSP course and actually see how that actually operates. In relation to our PSP, it's all available whilst you're actually on the course and until the end of the exams. You can redo everything that's on the PSP. So all of the lectures, all of the reading, all of the multiple choice questions can be repeated as many times as you want. And in fact, when we get into the revision, Emily, shall I go back to you? What happens, what do we tell students to do in relation to those multiple choice questions which are available on the course?
Well, we would very much encourage you to redo multiple choice questions. What you'll find is as you get towards the end of the course, you'll get bigger blocks of questions which look very much like the exam. So we'll feed you mock tests basically in 90 question blocks, just like you'll be doing in the actual exam. And when you do those 90 question blocks, you'll get a lot of data afterwards, which not only tells you which question you got right and wrong and why you got each question right and wrong, but it will also tell you what your strengths and weaknesses are. So you'll have data not just about whether you're good at tort and bad at criminal law, for example, but it will tell you whether you're good on Rylance and Fletcher as one of the topics within tort, or whether you're good on negligence. So it will really pinpoint in detail what your strengths and weaknesses are. So during the revision period, we'll be encouraging you to go back and do lots of practice questions which focus specifically on your weaknesses, not just doing general review of everything, because you won't have time to review everything, but really honing in, using the data that you get through your PSP on your particular strengths and weaknesses. And a lot of that revision will include redoing practice questions again and again and again.
Thanks, Emily. Suzanne, can I turn to you? So we've got a couple of questions on sort of the SQE2 course. So first of all, in relation to how much of that SQE1 knowledge do you still have to retain for SQE2? And secondly, well, how do you get it? Because obviously the SQE1 course will close after the exams and that will no longer be available. So how do people manage to still keep up to date in relation to that SQE1 material that they need to know about for SQE2?
Yes, so if you join the Barbary SQE2 course, once you sign up and join, you have access to all of the SQE1 material that's also the functioning legal knowledge that's tested in SQE2. So some students have various exemptions from SQE1, some students will have done SQE1. All students on the SQE2 course will have access to the relevant law from SQE1 to access during the time that they're studying on the SQE2 course. And we very much encourage students to go back and review their knowledge at the beginning of the SQE2 course by doing some of the multiple choice questions and dipping into those areas of SQE1 where they feel their knowledge isn't quite at the level that it needs to be. So you have access to that throughout the whole of the SQE2 course. And I would say that many students use and access their SQE1 material during the course as they progress through, and to top it up just before they get to their skills assessment in SQE2.
Thanks, Suzanne. And in fact, that SQE1 material is available before the SQE2 course starts, I believe, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. I think once you sign up, if you sign up early, and a lot of students who are keen to be well prepared will sign up early and get access to the SQE1 materials, and they'll sort of review their knowledge, because obviously SQE1 is a very wide subject area. They'll review the knowledge in preparation for their SQE2 course, so that when they start their SQE2 course, they feel that they've topped up their knowledge, especially if there's been a bit of time between them doing the SQE1 and starting SQE2.
Thanks, Suzanne. I've got another question, which has been about the sort of the timings, really, because obviously we have 3 different courses that prepare you for SQE1. We have a 40-week course, we have a 20-week course, and we have a 10-week course. Okay, so how can you get through the materials in a 10-week course if in fact there's a 40-week course? Who haven't I asked? Jane, would you like to be on the spot for that particular one?
Yes, of course. I think when you look at your personal study plan, when you decide to do the course, if you were, say, doing a 40-week course, obviously the amount of time you would be doing every day would be shorter than if you were doing the 10-week course. So the 10-week course is designed for people who have full-time capacity to take the programme, and also for those who have a recent law background, perhaps from university, so they're more familiar with the material. But the personal study plan is devised so they can get through the material in that 10-week programme, but it is more suitable for people who have complete time, full time to devote to the course.
Thanks, Jane. And yes, that's completely correct, because obviously on the 40-week course, you're spending about 10 hours a week or so prepping. On the 20-week course, you're spending about 20 hours a week on the course, and on the 40-week course you're spending all of your life on that course, really, for 10 weeks. No, not quite all of your life, but it's sort of 35 hours a week that you're actually studying on that course. So that's why we have the different courses available, depending on what works for different students, according to whether they're working full-time, whether they have a gap to be able to study, and so on. Now, in relation to the SQE2 material and the SQE2 course and the SQE1 material, the SQE1 material is available ahead of the course. It's not actually available now, because we've still got our current SQE2 course up and running for our existing students, because the inaugural SQE2 exams are actually going on as we speak. Some students are doing the orals actually today, and then the orals go on until the end of this month, depending on which oral people have actually signed up for. And so therefore the next SQE2 course is not yet available, because we've still got our current SQE2 students doing that course. But the materials for SQE1 will be available at least a month before the SQE2 course goes live. So the next SQE2 course is, I think, the 25th of July, maybe Suzanne, you can correct me if I'm wrong there. And so the SQE1 materials for that will be available by at least the sort of middle to the end of June, if not before then. Okay. Now, I have had, I think, a couple of questions which relate to people who are actually on the existing course and asking about where material is on that existing course. And I'm rather going to sort of pass the book on that one at the moment, because this is really more for people who are prospective students and want to know more about the course. So I would say that if you're not sure where to find materials on your existing course, then you can either ask a question of, one of your substantive legal questions from the information page on the PSP and raise that as a question, or you can drop into one of the strategy sessions and ask a tutor there. So anybody who's got a specific question about their actual PSP that is currently ongoing, I'm not going to be answering those questions here, because it won't really make sense to anyone who's not an existing student. So for those students, if you can, as I say, either use the link on the information page to ask a question, or drop into one of the strategy sessions that will be run for your course to ask one of the tutors there. Okay. So I've got another question here. I think I'm going to direct this to you, Emily. So are 4 mock tests enough?
So you have more than 4 mock tests. That's the first answer. You have 8, and 8 mock tests is enough. So in total, the course includes 2,500 or over 2,500 questions. There is a full simulated exam at the end of the course, which is 4 mock tests. And then you have another 2 which are distributed throughout the course, and then 2 extra which you can do at a time to suit you. So yes, that is absolutely enough. It not only means that you have so many questions that you would have forgotten what the earlier questions were by the time you get to the end of the course, it also gives you total coverage of the entire syllabus of SQE. So once you get to, well, significantly less than 2,500 questions, it has to be said, you have already asked questions about all of the most examinable topics. So if you start to try and come up with questions beyond that, you will be asking more obscure questions which are less examinable and actually preparing students less well. So you're better off going back to these highly examinable questions that you've forgotten at the beginning of the course and starting over. In fact, this model of exam comes from the States, as some of you may know, where they've got the bar exams. Now, the head of the American Bar Association told one of our American colleagues that the best way that any candidate could get ready for the exam, if she could give one top tip, her advice would be to do 1 practice test over and over again until you got 100%. So whilst we will not ask you to do that, and that's not the Barbary method, it makes the point very clearly that actually the kind of questions that you can be asked are limited to the subject matter, and you need to really be able to answer the questions that we give you very, very well, rather than have more questions to work with. So yes, we give you more than enough to get ready for the exam.
Thanks, Emily. I've got a question here about exemptions. I think I'll probably take that question. If you've done the GDL and the BPTC, can you be exempt from doing the SQE1? And my answer to that is unfortunately not, because even if you're actually a qualified barrister, you're not exempt from doing SQE1. Emily actually sat the pilot for the SQE1 exams because she was eligible to do so as a barrister, and therefore, would have had to have done the SQE1 if she actually wanted to requalify as a solicitor. So there are some exemptions from SQE1, but actually the GDL, a law degree, the BPTC is not an exemption. And that's because the material which is covered in SQE1 is material that would have been examined in a GDL in the past, and also what would be the compulsory parts of the legal practice course. So that's property law and practice, criminal practice, dispute resolution, and wills and administration of estates and solicitors' accounts, which are not part of the GDL or the qualifying law degree. So unfortunately, I'm afraid that you won't be exempt, Jo. Okay, I think I have answered all of the questions which are in the chat so far. So if I haven't answered your question, please re-put it in, because I've obviously missed it somewhere and I apologise. But I think I've answered everything that's actually there. Oh, so somebody's asked here, what are the main differences between the QLTS and the SQE MCT? And I would say that the style of questions is not different at all. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that Kaplan are reusing quite a lot of their QLTS questions that they have used before. The difference is in subject coverage, because the SQE is covers more subject area than the QLTS MCT did, the QLTS being the previous way that foreign qualified lawyers would requalify in England and Wales. The extra subjects which are covered are in business, it's insolvency, which isn't really in QLTS. Wills and administration of estates is not in QLTS MCT. Criminal practice is not in QLTS MCT, but is in SQ1, and dispute resolution and property law and practice and the other subjects that are not covered. So it's probably about another maybe 40% of the exam, would you say, Emily, that is in SQ1 compared to MCT?
Yes, but before you become really depressed about that sit key and think, oh, I should have gone for the QLTS rather than sitting this even worse exam with even broader coverage, rest assured that if you'd gone through the old route under the QLTS, you would still have been examined on that extra material, but you would only have been examined on that at the second stage, the skills test, which is now SQE2. So although the MCT part of the exam is worse, actually the skills part of the exam is therefore better, because you will have studied all of the law you need for SQE2 by the time you get there, which wasn't the case under the old system.
Yes, so you have more to learn at the beginning, but then an easier ride for the second part. So a little bit swings and roundabouts, isn't it, really? Okay. So I've got another question here, which is for people who are doing perhaps the longer courses. So, we're talking about our 10-week, our 20-week, and our 40-week course. So for those people who are doing the 40-week course, surely they will have forgotten the materials that they did way back, 8 months ago or something at the beginning of the course, by the time they actually get to the exam, 7 or 8 months later. Is that the case? Jo, could I ask you to deal with that one?
Yeah, and the short answer is no, that isn't the case. And the way that the PSP is structured is with spaced repetition and intermittent learning. So you do a little bit of one subject, and then you leave it and you go on to something else, and then you come back and you go on to something else, and you keep coming back and going backwards and forwards throughout the course. It takes some students a little bit of time to adjust to that method of learning, because they're often used to big blocks of, we will learn this and then we're not going to look at it again until revision, and then we will learn this and then we do the same. And that's not the way the PSP works, but that's actually a better way of learning, because that's the type of exam that you are heading towards. So in the final exam, you're not going to get 30 questions on business followed by 30 questions on taught. It's going to be all over the place, backwards and forwards. And so that way of learning is good practice for that style of exam. So you are constantly being brought backwards and forwards between the material, so you don't forget it. Quite often you think you will, and your scores in the practice test may fluctuate, but that's all part of the process. And I think one of the biggest tips as learning coaches we give to students at the beginning of whatever length of course they are on is trust in the process. Barbary have over 50 years experience in getting people through multiple choice exams. And so if you put all of your faith into the process and follow the PSP, you will get to where you need to be, even if it feels a little bit outside your comfort zone initially. That's just the style of the PSP, because of the style of exam we are heading towards.
Thanks, Jo. I think that's really helpful. And I think that point that you've made about trusting the PSP is the advice that we would give to all of our students. And it does feel a very, very different way of learning at the start. In fact, we have a whole workshop on this as we're trying to convince people that it does actually work, using various sort of scientific rules about how it actually is an efficient way of learning. And one of the things that we talk about there is that by the time you actually come to do the SQE, you are quite experienced learners, because you should be graduates, at least. A lot of you have post-graduate qualifications as well. So you've all been learning for a very long time, but you possibly haven't been learning very efficiently for a very long time, because it's rare when you actually are in education that educators actually train you how to learn on things. Instead, they tend to just give you lots and lots of information in various different ways, whether it's didactic style learning, which is somebody standing at the front and lecturing at you, or whether or not it's facilitative learning, which is you actually having a go at it with having somebody sort of there to guide you and be supportive and that sort of thing. Whether it's rote learning, there's various different styles of learning, but educators tend to impose a particular type of learning on their students, but they don't actually ever teach people how to learn or discuss the efficient ways of learning. And to get to the stage that you're at the moment, you're probably relatively good learners, because otherwise you wouldn't have got to university, you wouldn't have got your degrees and that type of thing. And so you tend to be quite wedded to the methods that you've used in the past, because you think, well, these work. I'm now, however old I am, I've got, a string of degrees to my name, some postgraduate qualifications, whatever. Of course, I know how to learn. But in fact, the reason that you might have done so well up to this stage is because you're actually, quite bright. And so therefore, even with an inefficient way of learning, you can still actually pass those qualifications. But we're training you to use a completely different method, which is much more efficient. But it does feel, as Jo said, slightly uncomfortable at the beginning, because if you've been doing something for 15, 16, even longer years, trying to change that is something that's quite hard to do. None of us like change. All of us are very much, no matter how much people say that they're spontaneous and whatever, no, they're not. People don't really like change. So they all sort of carry along, don't they, in the same old sort of furrow that they've always been doing. But our methods are actually very efficient and enable you to retain a huge amount of information for, it's still a lot of work. I'm not saying it isn't a lot of work, but for a lower amount of work than previous methods that you might have used in the past. So the whole point about our course is to trust the PSP to do what it tells you to do. And you will start learning, maybe not in the first few weeks, even in the 10-week course, but the information that you retain really starts to sort of, it doesn't go up on a straight line. It's sort of sort of goes along a little bit at the beginning, and then towards the end of the exam, it starts going up, you know, on a curve. I'm not very mathematical. I don't know if it's a parabola or something, but anyway, it's probably some mathematical thing to actually describe it. But basically your learning gets much and much steeper as you get towards the exam. So I would say I've had various questions from people who are perhaps studying with other providers at the moment and have different methods or whatever, and thinking of joining us. It's join us, trust our method, and it works. From the November exams, so the inaugural exams that were done in November, we contacted all of our students who were registered with us before the exams and asked for their results when the results were actually published, which was a long time later, but we asked for all of those results. We got results back from over 300 of our students who'd sat the exam, and we had a 77% pass rate from those students, compared to a published pass rate of so, you know, what overall, out of the 1,070 students who did the exam back in November, the pass rate was actually 53%. So the Barbary method does work if you follow the PSP. So that would be my advice for anyone who's come to us from somewhere else, has a different method of learning in the past. I'm sorry, you have to follow our method of learning because it does actually work. So we are a little didactic about that, I'd say, wouldn't we, as learning coaches, that we say, you know, don't do your own thing, do what we tell you to do, follow the PSP. It gives you a task. We've done all the heavy lifting for you. You don't have to think, oh, what should I revise now? What should I do next? Basically, you log onto your PSP and there's a list of tasks, and you do the first one, then you do the next one, and then you do the next one. Then you might log off, come back the next day and start again at that top of that list of tasks. As soon as you've done it, it goes away. You can still access it again later, but it's not there in your list of tasks to do. So it's very easy to actually follow the system. Okay. And which course you're going to do, there are pros and cons of each course. Obviously, the 40-week course is better to do if you're working full-time because it requires 10 hours a week. So it's very doable on a full-time job and with other commitments and so on. I would say the disadvantage of that is it goes on for a long time. So it's a big commitment in time that you're making for that 40 weeks. As you get to the shorter courses, then you're giving up potentially less of your life in terms of time, but within those weeks, you actually have to be able to make the commitment. So I think when you're deciding which of our courses to come on, if you want to come with us, you've got to look at the time we tell you it takes to do for that course and think, can I actually commit that amount of time to the course? So before you actually sign up, sit down and look at your calendar, look at what you do on a week-by-week basis and think, where could I carve out this time? You know, so if I'm thinking about doing the 10-week course, do I have 35 hours a week free? Well, if you've got a job, I should say no. No way will you have 35 hours a week free unless your employer is giving you study leave for the period of the course, in which case that's absolutely fine. If you're working as well, then you're looking at between the 20 and the 40-week course. And again, it really depends on how much time that you've actually got. So look at your, you know, what do you do every week? You know, what time do you start work? What time do you finish work? What other commitments do you have? Do you go to the gym 4 times a week? Do you have childcare commitments? Do you have commitments to other family members? That type of thing. And you need to sit down with a piece of paper and actually think, okay, so say I was starting this course tomorrow and I have to now find 20 hours a week to study in or 10 hours a week to study in or whatever. Where would I do that? And then that will tell you which course is best for you, because if you can't find 20 hours a week to study, then the 20-week course is not for you. If you can't find 35 hours a week to study for that 10-week period, then the 10-week course is not for you. Instead, the 40-week course would be the one that's most appropriate for you. So it's that sort of thing that you've actually got to consider. Okay. Another question I've got. So who haven't I asked for a while? Jane? It's you.
Yes.
Spotlight on Jane.
No problem. What's the question? Fire away.
Okay, so what about your background? So, you know, say you're a corporate lawyer, you don't have much experience of litigation, or conversely, you're a criminal lawyer and don't have much transactional experience, or you're somebody who's a non-lawyer, has got no legal background whatsoever. Are you going to be disadvantaged doing our course?
Yeah, firstly, I'd say absolutely not, because the way the material is structured, it's been written in a very easy to follow, understandable way, so that even if you are a corporate lawyer, you might be excellent at corporate areas within the studies, but the criminal law may be something that you haven't covered for years. So everybody, whatever their legal specialism, there will be areas within the study guide or within the modules that they haven't come across for a long time. So whatever level the person's at, the guides and the plan are written appropriately to cover that. Remember that the level you're aiming at is newly qualified solicitors. So some of you may overachieve on that when you start, but there will be areas that you haven't come across for a long time. So it is a complete guide, a complete course to prepare anybody for the SQE1 exam. Now that includes those who are corporate, those who are practicing in crime, and those who aren't practicing at all. People from a non-law background, when we analysed the results, we found that there was actually no difference in terms of their the amount of people who passed. So the course obviously prepares non-lawyers as well as lawyers, because the pass rates between people with a law background and a non-law background were identical from our November cohort.
Thanks, Jane. So hopefully that reassures people who either have got a non-legal background or have specialised in a particular area for a while and perhaps, have forgotten all of the law that they might have done before. I do think, for those of us who have, lectured on the GDL and then on the LPC, or on a qualifying law degree and then the LPC, because obviously people aren't using the Barbary method. Perhaps that's the reason, but I don't know. But, there's a lot of time when on the LPC, say you're teaching property law, where you might say, okay, so, a negative covenant, is it enforceable? And people look at you and you go, negative covenant, Tulk and Moxey, what are the conditions? That's like, that was last year. I know nothing about what happened last year, because a lot of the ways, particularly I think in this country, that we train people to pass exams at sort of GCSE, A-level, undergraduate level, it's very much, as Joe was saying, you do something in a semester, you're examining it, you move on, and people very much have a short-term memory of that material. They don't have any deep-seated learning for it, so they don't really retain it to the level that they need when they actually come on the course. So our course is designed for somebody who knows nothing about the law, and if you already know it, you might be able to read through those particular chapters or watch those lectures a little bit quicker than somebody who doesn't know it. But then, as Jane said, you'll probably hit something a little bit later on that you might go a little bit slower on, and other people might be a little bit quicker on. As learning coaches, we all have different expertise and different areas that we're far more happy dealing with. So you'll find out about those if you come on our course and are in our workshops, when we're usually quite open. So for example, I think for anyone who's actually been on our course, it's quite well known that I do not like criminal law, whereas Emily obviously really enjoys criminal law as a criminal law barrister, and she doesn't like my subjects, which are business accounts and business accounts and solicitors accounts and that type of thing. So everybody has areas that they feel more comfortable in, everyone has areas that they're not as comfortable in, but we will cover everything for you and you will know enough to be able to pass the exam. What about when to actually do the prep then? So I've had a question now for if working full-time, can one choose to do all the prep on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, or would there have to be some prep on the weekday? It's a question from Blossom. Well, I'd say, first of all, it depends on which course you're on, as to, you know, when you're actually going to do it. But Emily, when would you recommend people actually do their prep?
So assuming that you're on a part-time course, Blossom, working alongside, so not the 10-week course, you can, well, on all of our courses, you can personalise your PSP. So you can block days out on your calendar and say, I'm not doing any study on that day. And then the assignments that are fed to you on the other days will be increased to compensate for the fact that you're having days off. So you can personalise your PSP, so you only get tasks assigned to you on the days that you want to do work. So theoretically, you could block off all weekdays. Let's say you're signing up to the 40-week course and your 10 hours of study would then be allocated to you only on the weekends. So there's no reason why you can't do that. That would take you to 5 hours of study per day on the weekend. I'd say think carefully before you do that, because the downside when you're doing 5 hours of study is that it may be harder to stay concentrated at the required level. But, you know, you can certainly get through 5 hours worth of material on weekend days. So if that's the way you want to study, then you can do it. What we tend to find with most of our 40-week students is that they tend to do a little bit every day and then ramp it up significantly at the weekend. So they might do an hour or half an hour on their lunch break or before work or after work. And doing those little bite-sized pieces really eats into the material. It may not sound like a lot, but a 20-minute lecture here and there, you know, just like I say, on your lunch break, will really eat into the overall amount of work that you have to do. And then that will give you an opportunity to have a break as well on the weekend. Because if you are thinking about the 40-week course, bear in mind that planning not to have a weekend off for 40 weeks is pretty brutal. You're probably going to be better off doing a little bit during the week and giving yourself at least a day off at the weekend, so you have a real proper rest as well, so you can sustain your momentum. But this is the kind of thing that you could discuss with your learning coach. If you want to try different things out as well, you can personalize your PSP and then amend it if you don't like it and try something else. You don't have to stick with your method of study that you start with. And indeed, we do find that through conversations with the learning coaches that lots of students do tend to tweak the way in which they study, and often that will mean front loading their study, so doing a little bit earlier in the day and actually doing a little bit every day during the week as well. But there is no reason why you could not do it on the weekend if you're signed up to the 40-week course, if that is your preference.
Thanks, Emily. Suzanne, can I just bob over to you now and ask effectively the same question, but for SQE2? Could you actually choose to do all of the work on the weekends for SQE2, or would you have to do some of the work during the week?
I think that, again, it depends on what you're doing, the type of work that you're doing during the week. On SQE2, we had students who were working full-time, some were working part-time, some were not working at all. If you're doing a very intensive job where you're starting early, you're finishing late, and there were some people working for city firms that were doing incredibly long days, and they weren't able to do any of their work during the week, and they were trying to pick it up at the weekends. I think it's challenging. Ideally, I say to my students, look, this is about a marathon rather than a sprint. So you're looking to be able to be fit enough to perform well when you do your assessments. You don't want to be exhausted in the preparation stage, and then you get to the assessment and you're just completely unable to focus. So again, I think it's, you know, you have to really ask yourself, can I fit my study into my work pattern? How can I adjust it to make sure that I can do my study and do my job and do both well? And, you know, you've got to have sometimes a serious conversation with an employer about protected study time, protected study leave, in order to get you to the end of the course and through the assessments. So again, very much looking at your personal situation and finding a way to protect time for study on a regular basis. I would say it's a difficult course to do if you cannot allocate time during the week to do some study, you are literally having to spend your weekend studying, and is it sustainable long term?
Thanks, Suzanne. And how does it work with the oral assessments as well, and the appointments that you'll have with a tutor to actually assess you and give you feedback on the skills that you're actually doing in SQE2?
Okay, so in SQE2 you'll have what we call PFA, so that's practice feedback assessments, where you'll have an allocated appointment with a specific tutor, and you'll have a practice session where you're doing an interview or your advocacy, and you need to be able to adapt your timetable so that you can attend those sessions, because they're online, but you have to be at the appointment at the allocated time. There are some practice sessions that you do in your own time, and you don't have to be in person, which are more flexible, but you've got to take into account that there are certain appointments you've also got to attend during the course, and you need to be able to put those into your schedule. Try to give students advance notice of when those are going to be. There's tutor appointments as well they need to attend, and there are, of course, on SQE2 as well, strategy sessions, and you can attend those in person, but there's also a recording that you can attend. So you need to be able to go to appointments online at various times during the day, or to have a sort of flexible schedule where you can fit in those daytime appointments.
Thanks, Suzanne. There's a question that's come in about QWE, so I'll just deal with that, I think. So in relation to QWE, QWE is the 2 years that you actually have to be working in the provision of legal services to also qualify. So to qualify using the SQE route, you need to do SQE1, SQE2, unless you're exempt from either of those. You have to have a degree or equivalent. You have to be able to deal with the sort of conduct requirements, which is basically that you're not dishonest, you haven't got any criminal convictions against you and that sort of thing. And you also have to have 2 years qualifying work experience, again, unless you're exempt from that, which you might be if, for example, you were a foreign qualified lawyer already, but that would vary depending on how your qualification had come about and which jurisdiction you're from. And for qualifying work experience, the difference between qualifying work experience, or one of the differences between qualifying work experience and the traditional method of training, which requires you to do a training contract, is that you can do that qualifying work experience in up to 4 different organisations. And also the solicitor who signs you off as being as having done that qualifying work experience is not actually signing off that you're competent in any of those areas of legal work, because that is done by the SQE2. So by passing SQE2, you have met the standard of a newly qualified solicitor in all of those various different skills. So the qualifying work experience has to be in the provision of legal services. It doesn't have to be in the UK. And you have to have had the opportunity to be exposed to some or all of the competencies of a newly qualified solicitor, which is set out on the SRA's website. It's got to be at least 2 competencies. So if you were only doing 1 competency over and over again, then that wouldn't qualify, but it's got to be at least 2 competencies. So there is some webinars on the SRA's YouTube page, which are for not just students about what is SQE, but also for employers, for people who would actually be signing it off, to explain to them what they're actually doing and what they're actually signing off, so that they can realise that they're not actually signing off as competence, which I think is something which really quite worries solicitors signing off QWE. It is a new method, people are not used to it yet, and so therefore you need to speak to the person who would be signing it off and perhaps get them to watch those webinars so that they're comfortable about what's actually involved. But the other thing that you need to think about with your QWE, which I think is really, really important, is not just, can I actually get my 2 years qualifying work experience and therefore qualify as a newly qualified solicitor, but how is that QWE that I am achieving helping me to get the job that I want to do as a newly qualified solicitor? Because there isn't an awful lot of point getting your QWE signed off and qualifying if in fact that QWE that you've done will not allow you to step into the job that you're looking for as a newly qualified solicitor. And instead, you might be thinking that it would be better, because you don't have to take the first 2 years QWE that you do. You can take any mixture of it from up to 4 different organizations. So you might, say, for example, you're working as a paralegal or something in, say, I don't know, personal injury field or something, but you actually want to be a corporate lawyer. Well, you might get 2 years QWE. It might enable you to qualify, but you would struggle to get a newly qualified solicitor job in corporate law if you had no background in that whatsoever. So instead, you might be looking to try and move from where you are at the moment to get some qualifying work experience that is more relevant to the area that you actually want to qualify in. So I think that's something that you have to think about. So if you're not sure about whether or not the work that you're doing qualifies as QWE, then what you need to think about is almost turn it on its head. Not does it qualify as QWE, but will it actually help me to get a job as a newly qualified solicitor in the area that I actually want to qualify as? And if it won't, then whether or not it does qualify as QWE is almost irrelevant. Do you see what I mean? Because you need to find something else that's going to work for you a little bit better. So that would be my advice in relation to QWE. But there's a lot of information on the SRA's website. There's a lot of webinars that you can watch that the SRA have done on QWE if you go to their YouTube, and I'm sure at some point we'll be doing some sessions on QWE. We've done some already, so keep watching our website and look out for those. Okay, so I had another question which now I can't find, so just bear with me a second while I try and find that. Oh yes, maybe Emily, you might be able to answer this, or Suzanne perhaps. Is it possible to do SQE1 in January 23 and have enough time to study the SQE2 or to study for the SQE2 in April 23 whilst working full time?
So the course for SQE2 is 12 weeks long. The difficulty with going straight from SQE1 exam onto the SQE2 exam is actually the length of time it takes Kaplan to get your results out. You cannot book your place for SQE2 until you have passed SQE1. So you have to have your results before you are able to book a place for SQE2. As I understand it, and Tracy, do jump in if I need to be corrected on this point, but as I understand it, Kaplan have now said that students sitting in January will have their results in time in order to sign up for SQE2 before the booking deadline for SQE2 in April has passed. There is a proviso to this though, so you should be aware that it will be subject to availability, and Kaplan do their best to and they have extended enormously the number of places available, but especially because it involves oral exams, they are limited by the number of examiners they have and the venues that they have. So SQE2, the orals can be sat in London, Cardiff and Manchester. If there are still spaces available, then Kaplan have said that you will have your results in time to book before the booking deadline for April. But just be aware, if you sign up for our course, which is 12 weeks long, which you can do, you can start it. You'll have to start it, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Tracy, but I think you'll have to start it before you have your results, because you'll be sitting in January, and in fact the course will start in January, so you won't get your results until quite soon before the actual assessment takes place, at which point you can book. So if you find out at that point that you cannot sit, you'll need to finish the SQE2 course. You'll be able to retain access to the course materials, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Tracy, but
not sure about that. Yeah, so the difficulty is you've done the course, but you haven't done the course preparing you for the correct exam. That's exactly.
You're separating your prep from when you'll be sitting, potentially. But if you're willing to take that risk and take a gamble on availability, then you can go straight on from SQE1 in January to SQE2 in April. But it won't be without its stresses, I think, as you're waiting for your results for SQE1.
Yes, and just to point out that that's not possible for this year for anyone who might be thinking of joining the 10-week course to prepare for the July 22 SQE1 exam. The SRA have said that the results for the July SQE1 exam will not be released in enough time for you to be able to book into the SQE2 exam. So although they will be released before the SQE2 exam itself, there is a booking window for each exam, and you're only allowed to book into an exam within that booking window, and the booking window will have closed. So if you were planning on doing the SQE2 exam in July and the SQE1 exam in July and the SQE2 exam in October 2022, you need to think again, because that will not be possible, because you won't get your results in time. So just think about that. You could do a course with us to do that, but we would always recommend that you do a course that prepares you for the exam that you're going to do, because as we're getting you ready, we are getting you to that pass standard at the end of the course, ready for the exam. There's no point peaking too early. It's a bit like, I think Suzanne said, it's running a marathon rather than a sprint, didn't you, Suzanne? So it's the same thing. If you were going to be running a marathon in April, you wouldn't do all of your training to get yourself to the state that you could run 26 miles by the 1st of December and then do nothing and turn up and try and run the London Marathon in April. I think you would struggle a little bit. So we would say the same for our courses. We're coaching you, we're getting you to that sort of peak personal best, ready for the exam. So you really want to do a course that's preparing you for that exam, rather than doing our course and then having a break before you actually do the exam. So that's one thing I'd say. Okay, so another question here, is it better to listen to all lecturers assigned in one day, then read all chapters in the study guide, or listen to one lecture at a time, then read the relevant chapter, and then repeat the same process for another lecture and another chapter? What's more effective? So Jane, could you answer that? How does our PSP feed that work to you?
Right, well, it will start off with an overview, and you'll find that you will then have a lecture on the relevant area, and then you will do some practice questions. So the reading isn't assigned until much later in the actual schedule, so that you'll have actually looked at some questions before you do the reading. So what you're best to do is do the study in the order in which it is given to you. Sometimes us as learning coaches are speaking to students who are having difficulty in trying to fit their work in around their working day. If that's the case, we often suggest start working in the morning, and it might be that you do a chapter of the reading in the morning and break it up over different days. But if by that you're suggesting you do it all in sort of out of order, all in different blocks, was that what the question meant, Tracy?
I think so, yes. Yeah.
No, I wouldn't recommend to do it in blocks, because if we look at how we retain information, you retain it for a longer period of time if you do what we call interleave practice. So you're splitting different topics up and also then repeating that topic when something called the forgetting curve kicks in, and then we will feed you a bit more information about that topic. So I would say, although students do prefer to do everything in blocks and perhaps do all the reading in relation to one topic, do follow the order in the plan.
Thanks, Jane.
Yeah.
And then there's another question here. How could I make a balance in my study plan between hard copy materials and virtual materials, as spending much of time, a lot of time in front of a computer is inconvenient for me? Well, I would say that our course is primarily an online course for the SQE1. So, a lot of the information that you're getting, you are getting through your PSP, which is electronic. So all of our lectures you have to watch on your computer. All of our multiple choice questions are on the computer, some of the revision materials and so on. There are obviously the textbooks you do get in hard copy as well as electronically. So you can read your textbook. You can choose to either use the electronic version or the hard copy version. But I don't know if anybody has an idea roughly in terms of timings, what the difference is between the books and the rest of it. Do you have any idea, Emily? I've never looked at that. How long would you spend?
I don't know what the balance is, but you'll cover all of the material in full twice, once through the lectures, which is online, and once through the reading. So let's, for argument's sake, say that that's the same length of time roughly. Then you'll also have all of the MCQs, which are also online. So you've got half of the delivery of content, which is online, and the other half you could do in hard copy. And then you've got 2,500 practice questions, which are online only.
So it's probably going to be maybe 3/4 of the course online, I would say, at least. Probably.
Can I just say that with the nice weather, I find sitting in a comfy chair with your laptop quite relaxing. So I have been listening to lectures on my laptop, but not in my office. So just changing your location and maybe, you know, a more relaxed location to listen to your lectures. It doesn't feel as intense as if you're sitting in an office in a hard chair, you know, looking at a screen all the time. So change up your location, change the chairs you sit in. And there's no reason why you can't take your laptop into the garden as long as your Wi-Fi will go that far, and that really does help.
Yeah, you do need Wi-Fi. Yeah, sorry, go on.
What I would say as well, yes, Tracy said you signed up to an online course. The other thing is, because the exam is computer based, it's good to be practicing the type of question on a computer. So although we work out it's, you know, 1/4 of the content you can read in your books, actually I would say for doing your practice questions, computer is the best way to practice those. And as you go through our course, you'll have realistic, you know, question sets together, which will give you the stamina that you're going to need for the exam of sitting through a computer, look into computer screen for that length of time, selecting the correct answer. So I don't know if that helps at all.
Thanks, Jane. Yes, I think it does. Because it's a long exam, isn't it? I mean, you've got 2 days of exams, FLK1 and FLK2, and each exam day is split into 2 blocks. So you have a 2-hour, 33-minute exam. I have no idea why it's 33 minutes. It would be so much easier to say it if it was 2.5 hours, but 2-hour, 33-minute exam in one block, a 60-minute break, and then another 2-hour, 33-minute exam immediately following that, and then 2 or 3 days gap, and then you repeat it all again, but with the FLK2 materials. So you have to be able to read off a screen for a long period of time. If having internet is difficult, then that could again be hard for the course, because you can't download the lectures or the multiple choice questions. You have to be online at the time to actually be able to do those. Okay. And in relation to the exam itself, so we've got a few questions about what can we actually expect on the test day. Must you answer the questions in order? Can you flag them and come back later? Are you allowed to use pencil and paper? Is there a highlight tool available in the test, etc.? Maybe Emily, could I ask you about that?
Sure. The first thing to say is that the Barbary course preps you not just for the law, but it preps you for all of these kind of questions. So you will have workshops where we go through exactly what to expect in terms of exam functionality. And in fact, the Barbary practice tests largely mirror the functionality that you will have in the exam itself. So once you've done the practice tests, once you've attended the workshops, you will know exactly what to expect from exam day. And we'll even show you a video of what a typical test centre looks like. So you'll literally have very little that you won't know about what to expect on exam day. Now, in terms of the functionality of the test, yes, you can flag questions and you can come back to them. So that's a really important aspect of time management that, again, we will prep you for how to manage your time when you've got 90 questions in 2 hours and 33 minutes, but you can flag and come back to ones which are difficult. How do you then best manage your time? We will prepare you for that, so don't worry about that. You will have not highlighter and pencil, but you'll have something almost equivalent to rough paper, but laminated. So wipe clean board and a marker pen that you can make notes on. So again, we will give you some tips and advice on how to best use your marker board during the course of the exam to make sure that you use that to manage your time effectively. So I think that's all I'll say about exam functionality at this stage, because we will prep you for this much nearer the time.
Yes, thanks, Emily. There have been quite a few things which have been posted in the chat in relation to qualifying work experience, the links to the webinars that I was talking about, and also the link to our preview, which is where you can see what our PSP is like. So have a scroll through the chat to find those links if you're interested in any of those. Another question on QWE, do you need to be supervised by a qualified solicitor? You need to have your QWE signed off by a solicitor of England and Wales. That has to be somebody who's on the roll in England and Wales. They don't have to have a practicing certificate, but they do have to be on the roll of solicitors held by the SRA. They don't have to be actually supervising you daily, they just have to sign off your qualifying work experience. But as we mentioned before, what they're signing off is how long you have actually done that qualifying work experience at that organisation, that you have had the opportunities to be exposed to some of those competencies, and that there's been no professional conduct implications whilst you've actually been in that organisation. So they're not signing off your competencies, so they're not necessarily supervising you on a day-to-day basis. It's likely, if you have that qualified solicitor supervising you on a day-to-day basis, it's likely that they might be the person who does sign you off, but it will depend on the organisation, because some of them might have a rule about who does the sign-offs. It might not be your immediate supervisor, it might be somebody else. That will just vary internally, perhaps. Somebody's asked, why does it take so long for the SRA to publish the results to the SQE1? It's a multiple choice test. Surely the results would be available the same day. So anybody want to step in there? Joe, do you want to have a go at that one?
It's the $1 million question, isn't it? If we knew the answer to that question, we could all retire. I don't think it's as simple as saying they could be published the same day, because it's not as though you're just marking them off and they're all correct. There's a lot of analysis goes into the papers once they've been completed. So there is some time available where they are analysed. It's put through all their tech. They strip out the questions that perhaps they didn't think worked because perhaps everybody got them wrong, and they work out the pass mark from that. So it does take time, and I don't think it will be fair to suggest that they could do it in the same day. That said, they do seem to take quite a long time to get the results published, which is unfortunate. So I'm sure it could be quicker. We don't know really what they do in that time, and we would like it to be quicker. We know our students would like it to be quicker, but there is a process that they go through once all the papers are in. It's not just a case of ticking boxes and publishing those results. So that may be go some way to explaining why it does take a little bit longer than a day.
Thanks, Joe. Yes, there's a huge amount of statistical analysis, they tell us, that goes on after they've actually, after students have sat the test. And they also have these things called ANCOF panels, which decide what a newly qualified solicitor should be expected to score on that particular test. Because as I think Emily alluded to earlier, there is no set pass mark for SQE1. Instead, the pass mark is set after every exam has been sat, based on that statistical analysis and the Angoff panels that they run and so on, and will vary from test to test, because what they are testing is whether or not those students are at the standard of a newly qualified solicitor. And as the questions will vary from test to test, so therefore the difficulty could vary from test to test, that will affect the pass mark. And what they want to be able to do is to ensure to everybody, once they come out of that test, that those people who've passed are at that newly qualified standard, and that the standard hasn't varied from test to test. The standard has remained the same, although the pass mark might have varied from test to test. Okay. Somebody's asked about the SQE2 written exam. So for the SQE2 written exam, you have 4 exams within that particular sitting on each day. So it's at the moment the one that's just happened, and then the next one that's going on to the end of October. They are 3 days that you do your written test, so 3 consecutive days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever, and you do 4 separate assessments within each of those days. So Monday you'll do 4, Tuesday you'll do 4, Wednesday you'll do 4, and there, I'm trying to add it up in my head, about 3.5 hours. Maybe you can correct me on this, Suzanne, because what happens is you have one of the big tests, which is an hour long, and then you have immediately, I think it was the writing next, wasn't it? So I think it was an hour and a half first. So you had either case and matter analysis or legal research, and then your writing assessment directly after each other. So that was sort of a 1.5 hour block. Then you had a 15-minute break, and then you had an hour and 45 minutes block, which was the drafting and the either legal research or case and matter analysis. I can't remember which one went to which one, but basically an hour and a half, then a 15-minute break, and then another hour and 45 minutes straight afterwards. So again, quite difficult and tiring exams in those days, and you have that then, let's say, on the bounce for 3 days, and then for the oral assessments are actually 2 hours long in total, but you do have a break between each oral assessment of about 15 minutes, but it does vary depending on how they're setting up the exams and so on. So they're quite, both days, whether they're written days or the oral days, are tiring days. Yes. Okay, I think that's all of the questions that we've had so far. So please ask any more. We've still got another 10 minutes or so if you want to ask any more questions. Maybe we'll just go for, has anyone got any advice that they would offer to students who are just considering or thinking about starting an SQE1 course? What would be your top tip? Maybe we'll just go through. Emily, what would be your top tip?
I think something that you said earlier, Tracy, is something that I'd encourage students thinking of starting to get ready for SQE1 to do very carefully before they sign up for any course. So look at when the exams take place, and then look at your diary and be realistic about what it is that you can achieve. Bear in mind that you'll be studying for SQE1 16 different modules effectively, all for one exam on one day. So that's an awful lot of content that you've got to learn. And if you're thinking about other modules that you studied in the past and kind of trying to add up to see how it compares, bear in mind that for this exam, you cannot cut any content from your revision for the exam. During your degree, chances are that you had to maybe answer 3 out of 7 questions or something, which might have meant that you'd studied 4 topics for each module that you were doing. That's not the case here. You have to study everything because they are asking you 360 questions. So there are no cutting corners. The Barbary course is roughly 340 hours, I think, in total, in terms of the content that it allocates. So, you know, where are you going to find those hours? And think very carefully about which course length you sign up for. You don't want to start something that you can't finish or that you need to defer. Your chances of success are greatest if you do not defer. So it is better to sign up for something that you can realistically complete than to try, say, for the 10-week course, and then when you find that you can't do it, then defer and join the 20 or 40-week course. It won't work as well as starting something that you can realistically achieve right from the off. So be really honest with yourself about how much time you have for study, and then sign up for the best course that suits your particular circumstances to get you ready for the first sitting that you can realistically get ready for. Now, it's very tempting to rush, but there are sittings every 6 months for SQE1. There is no rush. You'll only have to wait 6 more months to wait for the next sitting. So better to be honest with yourself about which one you can be ready for, rather than to try and do too much and then end up deferring.
I think that's really helpful advice, Emily. Jane or Joe or Suzanne, have you got anything else you would add to that?
I think Emily's stolen my top tip, so I'll give you my second top tip, and it really is about when you've chosen that course. I would say embrace it. I would say trust that we have prepared it for you in a way that works. I think a lot of our early calls with students as learning coaches are effectively encouraging them, or discouraging them, I should say, from stripping back what we've prepared on the PSP, and how can you get around it? How can I do it my way? How can I do what I'm used to? And I think that usually comes back to bite people when they do that. There's a very scientific and very specific way that the PSP has been designed and developed. As I say, Barbary has many years experience in this kind of course. And so if you do sign up for a course, whichever length, I would say just embrace the way that it's been designed, trust in the process. It's been designed that way for a reason. And if you are struggling in any way, then reach out to your learning coach, because that's what they're there for. I think when you start off thinking, how can I get around this and do it a different way? That's when you start to fall behind and you never quite catch up. So embrace the process and trust the PSP will be my top tip.
Thanks, Joe. Jane, anything you would add?
Yeah, within what Emily said, be realistic. There will be time when you can't study. If you're committing to a 40-week course or even a 20-week course, there will be times when you have life events to attend. There could be, holiday schedules, and obviously not if you're on the 10-week course, but if you're on the 40-week course or the 20-week course, be realistic. But there is some flexibility built in there. So, build, and if you say, well, I'm going to work solidly, 1.5 hours every day for 40 weeks, you will need time away from your study. So perhaps build in some time when you're planning a break, and that is doable. There will be times when your motivation dips, and that's what learning coaches are there for. And also the strategy sessions that are held regularly, when your motivation does dip, it's good to dip into them and come along and chat and see, other people be in the same boat. So yes, go for it. But just be realistic and think there will be times where you don't wake up in the morning and think, yes, I've got some studying to do, when you're feeling a little demotivated, so so that's what we're here for.
Thanks, Jane. Suzanne, anything you would add?
Yes, I would say that there are many online courses out there, and I've studied online courses, and they can be quite solitary. And I think one of the advantages that Barbary has is this idea that you have a learning coach that you can access when and if you need to access your learning coach. So some of my students just access me because things are going well, they just want to have a chat. Others because they've run into a bit of a roadblock. The important thing is to know that there is a resource out there in a learning coach that is there for short periods or occasional periods when you need them, and to just touch base with them when you think you need them. And that means that you're not just studying at a laptop on your own doing an online course. So there is someone there to talk to or for help if you find that you need that person.
Thanks, Suzanne. That's very helpful. We've had a few sort of, I don't know, maybe technical questions. Perhaps I'll put them in about, you know, the sort of hows and whys of the various different assessments. So at the moment, the SQE2 oral is only available in London, Cardiff or Manchester. So to come in to do the SQE2 orals, you will have to come into the UK. They might add in more places in the future. Who knows? That's the SRA. We are not in control of the SRA. We have no ability to influence that. But at the moment, SQE2 orals are only available in London, Cardiff and Manchester. And also, they're not available necessarily in all three areas for every single oral sitting. So for the orals that we're doing at the moment, for example, there are orals today and yesterday was the first ones, and then there's also another set of orals on Thursday and Friday this week. They were available in all of the centres, I think, but then they put on some additional orals in London at the end of April, the sort of 29th of April. They were only available in London. They weren't available at the other centres. And the same, there's some, I think, next week as well, isn't there, Suzanne? So, you know, sort of early next week, late next week, they put on another couple of sets. The ones that they put on, they only put on in London. They didn't put any extra ones on in London and Manchester. So it does vary. And which centres will be available for both SQE1 and SQE2 can vary from sitting to sitting as well. So SQE1 and also the written parts of SQE2 are available outside the UK at other, you know, the jurisdictions. Not necessarily every jurisdiction. So, for example, the SQE2 written exams are not available in North America. The SQE1 writtens were not available in North America in November because it clashed with a bank holiday there. So I think we ended up with 8 seats in Toronto. That were the only things in the whole of the Americas that were available. They are putting some SQE1 seats in July in New York. I think they released 19 of those, and they have added in some additional SQE1 seats in London because they all booked up for SQE1 in July. So I think at one point the nearest sitting to London was Derby at one point, wasn't it? I think, Jane, and which is quite a long way to go. And they did put in some additional seats in London, but not necessarily enough. You know, they just release them as and when, if they get more availability. So you can check, you can look on the Pearson VUE. If you go to the SRA's website, then there is a link to the Pearson VUE website, which shows which areas that they're sitting in them at the moment, but they could vary from sitting to sitting. So until the booking window actually opens for the particular sitting that you want to do, you will not know exactly where they're sitting them, and also how many seats are available, because when they open the booking window, there's a queuing system. And so you go into the queue. When you get to the front of the queue, you can then book your SQE1 or your SQE2 sittings as appropriate, and they will tell you what's available at that time. But we did find for the SQE1 some of the places that had less numbers available. So I think China, I think Dubai, that sort of thing, actually booked up on the first day. And I don't know whether or not they're releasing any more seats for those. So it's just a matter of you know, trying to book as early as you possibly can, and then if you haven't got a booking where you want to be in, to keep checking back to see whether or not they've released any more seats before the booking window actually shuts. You have to get through. Yes, you have 3 attempts at both SQE1 and SQE2. So you would have 3 attempts in total at SQE1 and 3 attempts in total at SQE2. If you do not pass within those 3 attempts, then you would have to resit the whole thing. And there's a 6-year window. So you have up to 3 attempts within 6 years of when you actually started sitting. If you run out of attempts within that time, you can't start again until the end of your 6 years. So you're sort of blocked for a while from actually being able to do the exam. For SQE1, you can pass half of it. So you could pass FLK1, which is one of the days, or FLK2, which is the other day, and carry forward a pass in half of it and only have to resit the other half. And you'd have then 2 goes to do that. For SQE2, there are 16 exams. You have to get whatever the pass mark is, distilled down. All of those 16 exams are all added together, averaged out. It's very complex. We tell you about it in SQE2, but you end up with 1 mark from all of those 16 exams. If that mark is the pass mark, you will pass the whole of SQE2. If it's not, you will have to resit all 16 assessments as a reset, and you would have another 2 attempts at that. So that's basically what happens. It's a tough exam and tough consequences, which is why, as Emily, Jane and Jo have said, you've got to think really, really carefully about when you're going to do that exam and whether you can actually put the time in to do the exam, because you don't want to do it and not pass and be on a 2nd or 3rd attempt. And also you've got to remember you have to pay to sit those exams. So it's currently £1,552 for SQE1 and £2,458, I'm thinking, but I might be slightly wrong on that for SQE2. They're going up by about £100 next year. So that's a lot of money to pay to sit that exam if you don't feel that you're in a good position to actually pass it. And that is paid separately to any fee that you pay to your course provider. So by enrolling in a course with Barbary, that doesn't mean that you're enrolled into the SQE1 or the SQE2 exam. You would have to separately book your place and pay for that. And if you withdraw from an exam after the booking window, then you lose 75% of that exam fee. So again, you've got to be really, really sure. Emily said that it is possible to defer the SQE1 course. It's not possible to defer SQE2 course, but it is possible to defer the SQE1 course on payment of a relatively low administration fee, but it's not possible to defer your exam place after the end of the booking window. So you really want to think carefully about, are you ready to make that commitment to do SQE1 before you actually start? Okay. There's a question about QWE. Do companies need to be recognised by the SRA for providing legal training? No, this is one of the differences between the training contract and QWE. You no longer, to provide QWE, you no longer need to be registered with the SRA as a training contract provider. And that's because you are not actually being signed off by your employer as being competent to be a newly qualified solicitor. Instead, that is done by passing SQE1 and passing SQE2. So you can, one of the ideas that the SRA had about introducing QWE was to make it much wider and much more available to people. So it could be offered in situations which would not be able to offer a training contract. So somebody has said that they work in-house as a paralegal for a fashion retail company. Yes, that's potentially going to give you QWE so long as you're exposed to those competencies on the website. And that wouldn't have been something you would have been able to do a training contract in before, because you possibly didn't have a mixture of seats, both contentious and non-contentious. That's not required anymore for QWE. Okay, so I think that we've actually answered all of the questions. And I think we've actually run out of time, haven't we, Fiona, as well? I think 1:30 was the end of this webinar. So I hope that we've answered a lot of the questions that you had, and keep an eye on all of our social media posts and so on, because we will be running other sessions for perhaps slightly more specific queries that you might have. So thank you very much. And if you do have any questions, then do get in touch and we'll be able to answer those after this webinar. Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye, everyone.